Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. So yesterday I talked about the death of Colin Powell, and we talked about the political side of it. Colin Powell, a Republican who, yes, in his later years spoke out against anti-Muslim rhetoric and condemned the xenophobia and the nonsense of Donald Trump and Trump's followers, was not a Trump supporting Republican, but also was one of the most sinister figures in the sale of the Iraq war to the American people and the international community with faulty intelligence back in 2003. And we looked at clips of that. And we talked about the political, and we also talked about the medical. Colin Powell was vaccinated. He was 84 years old, died of COVID complications. And I mentioned yesterday that many anti-vaxxers would use this and point to it and say, see, there's no point in getting vaccinated, ignoring, of course, that the data shows overwhelmingly that those who die are not vaccinated. And in addition to that, in the hours after we published yesterday's clip, we learned that Colin Powell was severely immunocompromised, had Parkinson's, as well as a type of blood cancer called multiple myeloma, which is a big, being in treatment for multiple myeloma is a significant immunocompromising a circumstance for an individual. But it didn't matter. The anti-vax stuff exploded, and it wasn't just the usual suspects. It was even Fox News daytime reporters pushing this stuff. The anti-vaxxers are foaming at the mouth, using Colin Powell's death while vaccinated to attack vaccines and to attack vaccine requirements. So we're going to go over this today, but it's important to say again, Colin Powell was not just a random guy who was vaccinated and died, which can happen. We have significant protection against severe disease and death from the vaccines. But with a planet of 7 to 8 billion people, you're going to have some random, seemingly healthy people who are vaccinated and die. That doesn't mean that we ignore the bigger statistics. But Colin Powell was not just a random guy. He was not even just a random 84-year-old guy who was vaccinated and died of COVID. He was an 84-year-old immunocompromised man who died despite being vaccinated, had cancer, and had Parkinson's, which significantly affects your immune system. But the anti-vaxxers want to pretend, see, the vaccine does nothing for anyone. Anybody could die. It's just chance. Fox News host Will Cain went on a rant yesterday morning saying fully vaccinated people are being hospitalized and dying, and it's just we can't trust anybody.
You brought up COVID. Look, this day will be a day for many things, for remembering the man, for remembering the leader that was lost. It's also a day to understand the implication on everyday Americans. And the reports are he died from complications of COVID. The family has made a point in their post on Facebook this morning that Colin Powell was fully vaccinated. And as Americans out there wonder what lies ahead for them, and they search and they need truth moving forward, we're seeing data from across the world. We're seeing data from Europe, from the United Kingdom, that fully vaccinated people are being hospitalized and fully vaccinated people are dying from COVID. And here we have a very high profile example that is going to require more truth from our government.
Now, of course, there's no lack of truth. The truth is you're overwhelmingly less likely to die of COVID if you're vaccinated. Colin Powell, he's straight up saying, this is anecdotal thinking. He's straight up saying this case shows that we're not getting enough truth. This case doesn't change the truth, which is the overwhelming majority of those who are dying are unvaccinated, even as the country is more and more vaccinated. Here's another similar example. This one is from Fox and Friends playing a similar game.
There will also be conversations about the fact that he was fully vaccinated, according to his family, and he died from complications from COVID. We are beginning to see statistics like this grow in frequency.
Yes, we are.
We know that the vaccine does wane over time in its ability to protect you from not just transmission and infection, but from severe complications and hospitalization, and obviously death as well. We know that it wanes, and we know that it's beginning to spill over COVID into the vaccinated population. Again, Colin Powell in the direct age demographic that suffers the most from complications from COVID. But I think everyone watching needs to be aware of limitations and protections.
Yeah, limitation. You are always better off with the protection of the vaccine. That's the reality. And then we'll follow up on this later. Fox News reporter John Roberts tweeted, Powell's death was evidence of the waning efficacy, tweeting, the fact that Colin Powell died from a breakthrough COVID infection raises new concerns about how effective vaccines are long term. No, it doesn't. And he subsequently deleted this tweet. As Mother Jones has been reporting, major news outlets ran headlines about this without acknowledging that Colin Powell was immunocompromised with multiple conditions, but talking about him being vaccinated. If you're going to talk about him being vaccinated, you've got to talk about the other side as well. New York Times, Colin Powell, first Black national security advisor, died at 84 of COVID. He was fully vaccinated, family said. Right, but you've got to tell both sides of that. MSNBC, Colin Powell dies from COVID complications. Powell was fully vaccinated. Newsweek, former U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell dies from COVID complications, was fully vaccinated. Colin Powell said in an announcement on social media he was fully vaccinated. If you're going to do that, you should really say fully vaccinated and severely immunocompromised. It would be irresponsible not to, or skip saying both. Skip saying both if you want. Here's Dr. Zeke Emanuel discrediting the idea that Colin Powell's death means the vaccines aren't working. And he mentions Powell's risk factors. Take a look.
Colin Powell had three important risk factors for COVID. One is his age, 84. He's at the very high end, and we know those people are much more vulnerable. Second, as you point out, he had cancer. And third, he's a man, and men are at much higher risk of dying, especially in his age category. 58% of deaths in those people 65 to 84 are male, even though they make up a minority of that age group. When it comes to multiple myeloma, it's a cancer of the cells, the B cells in the immune system that produce antibodies, so they don't produce effective antibodies, and they grow and grow. And when you treat someone for multiple myeloma, it does suppress the immune system, so he was immunocompromised.
Okay, so that's as if we needed more medical experts telling us what has become obvious over the year and a half of the pandemic. So we are now going to talk separately about specifically Tucker Carlson's dog and pony show that he did in reaction to this, because it's particularly disastrous and particularly weaponized. So Colin Powell died of COVID complications, severely immunocompromised, multiple myeloma, Parkinson's, and vaccinated, 84 years old. That's what we know. Fox News and others doing their sort of soft anti-vax type stuff. But Tucker Carlson really going fully in on it. As Media Matters reports, Tucker Carlson claims Colin Powell's death proves, quote, you've been lied to about vaccine effectiveness. You've been lied to. Now, of course, a vaccinated death in an 84-year-old immunocompromised individual doesn't disprove anything about vaccines, doesn't indicate anybody has lied. People lie all the time about all sorts of things. Colin Powell dying is not proof. Colin Powell dying is not proof that anybody in particular is lying. So let's take a look at this video clip. Here is Tucker Carlson. Let's just get right into it, because we have to start there to understand what the point is that's being made here.
A lot has changed in the years since, and that's one of the reasons that Colin Powell's death tonight is so poignant. Like almost everyone his age, Colin Powell was fully vaccinated against COVID. And yet, according to his family and doctors, Colin Powell died of COVID. Of course, that fact does not make his death any less sad, nor is it unusual. Many thousands of vaccinated Americans have died of COVID. Former CDC Director Robert.
So first of all, understand, when we talk about the data, thousands of Americans dying of COVID out of 700,000+ deaths, and overwhelmingly the deaths are the unvaccinated. If you don't understand that data, Tucker's comment is extraordinarily confusing. And a lot of the people, Tucker does that confused face during his show. Many of his audience members have that same face. They're just as confused.
Redfield announced just today that about 40% of all recent COVID deaths in the state of Maryland, for example, are among those who've had both shots.
Now, that's another deceptive thing. Imagine a 100% vaccinated country. In a 100% vaccinated country, 100% of deaths would be among vaccinated people. Why is Maryland important? Maryland is highly, highly vaccinated. So you have to understand that's a mathematical reality as well. And there's a specific reason why Tucker talks about Maryland.
So what does that tell you exactly? Well, it tells you you've been lied to. Vaccines may be highly useful for some people, but across a population, they do not solve COVID.
Now, that's two different things. First of all, you've been lied to. Well, what's the lie that you've been told? Number two, vaccines are useful at every population at reducing risk of death. You might have one population with a higher risk and one population with a lower risk. At all populations, you have a lower risk of death when vaccinated.
That's not speculation. It is an observable fact.
That's not true.
People who've been fully vaccinated can still get the virus.
True.
They can still transmit the virus to others.
True.
And they can still die from COVID.
At dramatically lower rates.
Colin Powell is hardly the only example of that. So the question is, why are they telling us otherwise? And the answer is simple. They're telling us that to divide us from each other.
That is completely untrue. I mean, this is, you have to understand the motive here for Tucker, who's almost certainly fully vaccinated, et cetera. And by the way, works for Fox News, which has one of the strictest vaccine mandates we've heard about for any large corporation. The whole point here is get people afraid, get people angry, afraid and angry. And at the end of the broadcast, Tucker Carlson casually mentions, oh, okay, I didn't mention that Colin Powell was suffering from a number of health problems, almost like an aside. He talked about Powell being fully vaccinated, didn't mention the health conditions, just kind of drops it in at the very end of the show.
Yeah, apparently. Dr. Jerry, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it. St. Luke's Hospital in Pennsylvania. Pleasure. Appreciate it. So at the beginning of the show, we told you about Colin Powell. We left out that Colin Powell was suffering from a number of different health problems.
Oh.
But of course, that's the point. The point of vaccinating the vulnerable is so people with other underlying health problems won't die of COVID. But unfortunately, that didn't work in the case of General Powell, and it didn't work for many thousands of other Americans. And of course, that's the point we're making in the first place. Yeah.
And what's funny is he's acting like this is an important point that nobody else is making. No one ever said the vaccines are 100% effective. And when you talk about population level statistics and you see the death rate among the unvaccinated versus the death rate among the vaccinated, the one story of Colin Powell, although Tucker is making a lot out of it, although Fox News and others are making a lot out of it, is not actually instructive in any way. It doesn't prove anybody lied. It doesn't prove that vaccines don't work. It doesn't prove any of it. But Tucker's audience is primed to accept this stuff hook, line, and sinker. We'll talk a little more about the data later in the show. You can send me your thoughts. Find me on Twitter at @dpacman. Today is the David Pakman Show live viewer town hall. It'll be at 6 p.m. Eastern time today, Tuesday, October 19th. It will be streaming on our Pakman Live YouTube channel. That's not the main YouTube channel. It's the second YouTube channel, Pakman Live. We'll see you at 6 p.m. And we'll be back in just a minute here. One of our sponsors is Blinkist, who's been supporting the David Pakman Show longer than any other sponsor. Blinkist is the app that lets you listen to or read an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. Blinkist is the way to absorb those books you can't make time for. Blinkist takes top nonfiction titles, pulls out the book's key takeaways and insights, and gives it to you in the form of a text or audio explainer that you can consume in 15 minutes. With Blinkist, now you actually do have time to learn about all the things you've been wanting to tackle. On the Blinkist app, I just listened to This Is Your Mind on Plants by the great Michael Pollan. Super interesting, the history of caffeine and so many other things. Blinkist has you covered on podcasts too. Blinkist takes long episodes of popular podcasts and distills them into audio you can listen to in 15 minutes. With Blinkist, you can become knowledgeable about so many different things. You can have conversations with people about more topics. Blinkist makes you more well-rounded Try Blinkist for free and get 25% off a subscription. Go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. The link is down below. All right, so let's do one more sort of awkward moment in the aftermath to the Colin Powell death that we reported on yesterday. I mentioned in the first segment how Fox News reporter John Roberts tweeted something completely insane about the death and vaccines and then quickly deleted it. Well, it got even weirder when then Fox News brought on a guest to talk about people that are reacting and saying things that are wrong. And John Roberts was sitting there very awkwardly as Dr. Nicole Safier was essentially describing what John Roberts said without actually naming him. So let's kind of like refresh this entire thing. John Roberts tweeted yesterday after the death of Colin Powell was announced, the fact that Colin Powell died from a breakthrough COVID infection raises new concerns about how effective vaccines are long term. Now, that's not true. We knew that immunocompromised people like Colin Powell would mount less on average of an immune response. We know that the older you are, and Colin Powell was 84, the more likely you are to die from COVID. Obviously, that goes down with being vaccinated, but vaccinated populations, the older you are, the more likely you are to die from COVID, and unvaccinated as well. It's sort of a distribution that is like that. So John Roberts quickly deleted this tweet. So then Fox News brings on Dr. Nicole Safier, and John Roberts is on screen. And Nicole Safier says, this doesn't mean the vaccines don't work. This stuff has to stop. A lot of people are spreading nonsense. And John Roberts looking very uncomfortable because she doesn't name him, but he had just gotten done tweeting this nonsense and then deleting it.
Something that you want to get out there in the wake of Colin Powell's death that you want people to know, because obviously there's a lot of information to take in on this. Final thought from you.
Well, I can tell you, Sandra, it's very upsetting to see that people taking Colin Powell's death and using it as the vaccine didn't work.
Oh, well, that's exactly what John Roberts did. And now he's going to sit there and listen to you.
This is a very specific situation, and one to use someone's death to try and make a point that really doesn't carry a lot of weight to it.
Oh, that's exactly what John Roberts was doing. He was trying to make a point that carries no weight using Colin Powell's death.
Is very frustrating. But I can tell you that this was a very specific situation. You had an elderly gentleman. I know that people don't like that word, but at the age of 84, he was already vulnerable for COVID-19. And then you add a cancer of the blood, and he is the most vulnerable when it comes to COVID-19.
Our thoughts with his family for sure at this moment after learning of his death this morning.
Yeah, John Roberts. Oh, yeah, very much. Yes, of course. Well, he's the guy who just did exactly that. He looked uncomfortable, and he should look uncomfortable. And it is an instructive lesson in, if we already know that while the vaccine reduces your risk of hospitalization and death dramatically, it is not 100%. And then one well-known person dies, it actually changes nothing. It changes nothing about our overall understanding of the vaccine's effectiveness. It's just we know the name of this person. It's a well-known person. That's what it changes. And these, I don't know if they're opportunists. I don't know if they're simply ignorant. I don't know if they're bad people who use this as they see it as opening the door to tweet exactly what John Roberts tweeted, which he was then later shamed, or someone called him and said, you really should pull that down. It is not serious thinking. These are not serious contributions to our understanding of how vaccination works, and they shouldn't be considered that. Okay, this is very, very interesting. This is in a way kind of like a Joe Rogan COVID part 2. This right-winger Dennis Prager is known for Prager University, which is a YouTube channel that puts out a kind of right-wing analyses and interpretations of the world. We've heard that there are some teachers who even play these PragerU videos in classrooms, which is wholly inappropriate. Dennis Prager is sort of like this uber right-winger. He's never seen a right-wing position he doesn't like, and he has been saying a lot of things that don't make sense about COVID all along. Dennis Prager now has coronavirus, okay? So he's doing his show from home. And in this clip, there's a few things we're going to look at. Dennis Prager has been downplaying COVID all along. He says in this clip he wanted to get COVID in order to develop natural immunity. And he tells us everything's fine, everything's no big deal. But he is taking 5 medications, including ones that are not proven to do anything for COVID. And it reminded me of the Joe Rogan thing where Joe Rogan also said, listen, I'm fine. I felt terrible for a day or two, but I'm taking, in Rogan's case, I think it was 6 medications plus supplements and vitamins. But this is no big deal. Now, of course, our question was, would you do that for the flu? Because if you wouldn't, then clearly this is more serious than the flu, which many of these folks deny. So let's just get into the clip. There's a lot here. And we're going to talk in detail about all of this.
Okay, everybody. All good. I'm broadcasting from my home.
Right. So, by the way, what he did there was he has a cough button. If you're watching, he just let out a horrifying cough, but it wasn't audible. Right at the top here.
Because I'm not going into the station as I have COVID. I was tested positive last week, and I have been steadily improving. At no point was I in danger of hospitalization. I have received monoclonal antibodies.
Okay.
That's Regeneron. I have, of course, for years, a year and a half, not years, been taking hydroxychloroquine from the beginning with zinc. I've taken Z-Pak, the erythromycin.
Right.
As the Zelenko protocol would have it, I have taken ivermectin.
Okay.
I have done what a person should do if one is not going to get vaccinated. It is infinitely preferable to have natural immunity than vaccine immunity.
That has not been demonstrated.
And that is what I hoped for the entire time. Hence, I so engaged with strangers, constantly hugging them, taking photos with them, knowing that I was making myself very susceptible to getting COVID, which is indeed, as bizarre as it sounded, what I wanted.
Wow.
In the hope that I would achieve natural immunity and be taken care of by therapeutics. That is exactly what has happened. It should have happened to the great majority of Americans. The number of deaths in this country owing to COVID is a scandal, which one day will be clear to America.
So I guess he's saying the COVID death toll is exaggerated or something like that. Now, the truth is, if we had taken a so-called herd immunity approach, like get as many people infected as possible, the estimates are that the death toll would be in the millions already rather than the hundreds of thousands. But where do I want to focus today? Do you take 5 medications for something that's no big deal? Do you take 5 medications including, I mean, these are some of these are serious medications. Do you take this for the flu? Do you take this for a cold? And clearly you don't, meaning you are conceding that this is different and more serious. So let's talk about them. Monoclonal antibodies. Okay, monoclonal antibodies appear to be effective at reducing hospitalization rate and the progression of severe disease and death when a patient has mild to moderate COVID. In the most serious COVID, it's not clear that the monoclonal antibodies help, but in mild to moderate COVID, it does seem to prevent the progression to more severe COVID. So monoclonal antibodies, yes, that's approved by emergency use, remember, a standard which many of these folks say is not sufficient for the vaccine, but they'll gladly take the monoclonal antibodies under emergency use authorization. Azithromycin, Z-Pak, okay, that's an antibiotic. Now, he calls it erythromycin. That's a different one. This is azithromycin. The data on azithromycin for COVID, the overall quality of evidence is low to very low, with a conclusion that azithromycin does not result in superior clinical improvement in COVID patients relative to placebo. Azithromycin is generally well tolerated and safe to use, which we know, it's an antibiotic that's been around for a long time, does not seem to do anything for COVID, but he's taking it anyway. Okay. Hydroxychloroquine. Now, there are instances of lots of things that you can find with hydroxychloroquine. You can find individual so-called studies, often with sample sizes in the teens or dozens, that may say it might work. The big picture is that the current body of evidence does not show a clinical benefit for prophylactic hydroxychloroquine. That's what Dennis Prager says he has been doing. He says he's been taking it prophylactically for a year and a half. And there is a higher risk of adverse events compared to a placebo or compared to no prophylaxis. So hydroxychloroquine, not unproven. No evidence it works. Ivermectin. Okay. There is some uncertainty about whether ivermectin compared with a placebo or the standard of care reduces or increases mortality in moderately ill hospitalized patients. And many of the studies have bias as well as imprecision. It's not even clear a lot of the studies being pointed to are acceptable. There have been multiple papers on ivermectin withdrawn after preprint because they were not rigorously done. It does not appear as though ivermectin helps treat COVID. He's taking zinc. Now, zinc, okay, high dose zinc has been studied. Supplementation, high dose zinc. It's been studied for colds. It's been studied and thought about for flu. With COVID, there is no evidence right now that there was a significant reduction in the duration of symptoms for people who are supplementing zinc. Some studies with a placebo arm, specifically on older patients, suggest hospitalized COVID patients seem to survive a little bit longer with zinc. It's important to note a lot of older folks are zinc deficient, so it could be a vitamin D type situation. It's worthy of a study. Right now, there's no causal association found with zinc on COVID. And we can't say that it actually helps. So what it might be with zinc is that you need to treat a ton of people with super high dose zinc. And have a lot of people in that population be zinc deficient to then find someone who actually survives altogether because of the zinc. We just don't know. It's certainly not clear right now that there's any causal link. So that's what Prager is taking. 4 of the 5 things he's taking aren't shown to actually do anything for COVID. And remember, this is something that's not serious anyway. It's something that's not serious anyway, as far as he and many others have said. So very confusing. And by the way, I've gone around hugging people and blah, 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 blah. Who knows what the follow-on effects of that are. And it certainly doesn't seem considerate to anybody else to be doing that in the middle of a global pandemic. So that's Dennis Prager, a man that many people see as a great thinker, as a great speaker, as a great almost like a mage of some sort. There are people who worship this guy, and this is what he's doing, taking 5 medications, 4 of which are unproven for something that wasn't serious anyway. Very, very strange stuff. And we'll have more on this on our Instagram, which you can find at David Pakman Show. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpakman.com. It's great to welcome back to the program today Bill Scher, who is contributor to the Washington Monthly and Real Clear Politics, also host of the history podcast When America Worked. Bill, always great having you on.
Always great to talk to you.
So I'm trying to understand different individuals' motivations in either being in favor of or against the various iterations of the infrastructure proposals that we've been seeing now for several months. Let's kind of start with what's been more in the news, which is maybe Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. When I step back and think about West Virginia, 47th in healthcare, very close to 50th, if not 50th in education, very poor infrastructure, would be a place that would really benefit from exactly this. It would seem like, hey, his constituents would reward him for getting them some money. And then the story that's now floating around is, well, look at his income from fossil fuel companies that would be hurt by the climate piece of this. Is it as simple as a follow the money type thing?
Well, I don't want to play mind reader, and I understand people wanting to connect dots, and everyone's welcome to have their own theories.
Sure.
But people went into this year thinking, oh, Manchin likes the posture, but this is essentially a populist state, and so he'll do the populist thing.
Yeah.
And now he's not doing the populist thing, so people are coming with fresh theories. And I think if you look at Manchin's longer record in politics from his very early days in West Virginia, he has always been a business-friendly centrist. That has always been his thing. It's not new. And why he's a business-friendly centrist, you're welcome to have your own theories about that. But that just seems to be the case. And at the end of the day, if you want this bill to pass, you need his vote. However annoying it is to get that vote, it is needed. And I think, and this is also true for Sinema, I think the strategy of browbeating them publicly and challenging their political acumen, accusing them of corruption, it may all be true, but it's not getting you their vote. They're not being shamed into moving off their position. So I think a different tack needs to be taken if you're going to get to 50, which may be happening. That we're seeing the conversation starting to materialize now.
Yeah, you and I both, I think, tweeted disfavor about following Kyrsten Sinema into the bathroom. And as I said, what I said on my show was, maybe you could make the case that the bathroom is the only place where she might be confronted by an opposing view. It seems contrary to reality, and thus that as a tactic doesn't seem to me to be particularly productive. But what can be done to effectively pressure a lot of these folks who, the boaters swam up to the yacht of Joe Manchin, and it wasn't particularly inspiring, the things that he said. I mean, like, what actually works to pressure these people from an individual voter standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, different tactics work on different people. There's not a one size fits all here, but at minimum, for the last several weeks and months, people have tried confrontation. People have tried getting into their personal spaces. People have tried haranguing them as being on the take. And not only have they not moved, they seem to have, dug in their heels. And even at the precise moment when progressives thought they were gaining more leverage by blocking the bipartisan infrastructure bill that Manchin spearheaded at Sinema essentially wrote, it's called Sinema Portman, for Pete's sake.
Yep.
Thinking, well, if we hold that hostage, that what's prized to them, they'll have to come around. Almost immediately, that price tag on Build Back Better went down by nearly 50%.
Right.
So the tactics just aren't working. And so I just think the entire approach of treating them as effectively adversaries, people who are not progressive, who don't see the world the way we do and need to be dragged in doing the right thing, that approach isn't working. I think you want to get the temperature down. You want to get into the same room with them and try to talk to them and figure out where is the common ground. There has to be, I mean, if there's no common ground, there's no common ground. I think there is some common ground. You got to find where that is and not make it into a grudge match, because a grudge match isn't working in progressives' favor.
Yeah, I do think that part of what makes it difficult is it seems as though Joe Manchin is very dishonest. And what I mean by that is, for a while he was saying the problem was the price tag. As you mentioned, iterations of this have seen a much reduced price tag, and now he doesn't like it for different reasons. So part of it is maybe common ground is the way to describe that, but also moving goalposts seems to be a real problem here.
Well, both Manchin and Sinema can be, I mean, Manchin can use a lot of word salad, which makes him inscrutable in certain ways.
Yeah.
And Sinema is very quiet, which makes her inscrutable. And this frustrates the hell out of progressives. I think as a negotiating tactic, is working very well for them. Everyone's chasing their vote.
Right.
Everyone's throwing things at them to figure out what's going to make them happy, so they're in the driver's seat. I don't think it's fair to say Manchin has moved the goalpost, because he has been consistent on a number of things. You look at that piece of paper that he signed with Chuck Schumer, back in July. Now, granted, this wasn't known to the rest of us at the time, but he communicated this to his majority leader of all the things that he wanted, that he was comfortable with, and essentially by omission, what he was not comfortable with. That's all been pretty consistent. He's been saying for a long time that he doesn't like this clean energy payment program, which was intended to be the centerpiece of the climate section of the bill. That's not new. So I think he's always had a combination of price tag concerns and substantive concerns. And people have tried to grind him down instead of accepting that he holds a determining vote. And so what are his concerns de facto become your concerns. You need to resolve those concerns to get a bill.
There's many progressives who every time this happens say, we got to primary Joe Manchin. And whenever that happens, I tend to think, well, I don't know that if a further left Democrat wins the primary, they actually win the general Senate election in West Virginia. That might lead to replacing a Democrat with a Republican. I think we need to be solving this. You solve 50-50 by taking some existing Republican seats and turning them to Democratic seats. What's your general perspective on this idea of primarying Joe Manchin, even as a pressure tactic to get him to be scared in some way?
Well, he's been primaried and he's unfazed. So, I mean, West Virginia is just too red. The fact that Joe Manchin is there at all is a gift for Democrats. They would not have a majority without Joe Manchin right now. It would be Mitch McConnell Senate, and we wouldn't be talking about a multi-trillion-dollar bill at all. So Manchin shrugs that off very gleefully. Now, Sinema is a different story.
Yes.
Sinema seems to have a theory of the case that she doesn't care either if she gets primaried, that her path of success is maverickiness, McCain-like independence from party leadership. And even though those primary threats are more pronounced and are very vocalized right now, again, she is not budging. So again, I understand worth trying it out to see if it might get her running scared, but she's not running scared. So, I mean, it may be by 2024 when she's up, she'll lose that primary. I can't say. I think she will probably survive a primary. It's very unusual for an incumbent to be ousted in a primary, particularly for ideological reasons. Usually, if it happens, it's for a scandal reason. Arizona is still pretty purple. It's not hard blue. And there are probably a lot of people in Arizona, even who are Democrats, who say electability comes first. So I would still put my money on Sinema surviving. But it's certainly not a slam dunk. But nevertheless, she's not being cowed by that pressure tactic.
What is going to, or we'll work backwards. Does this bill's passage or failure affect Democrats in 2022? Is it the type of thing that voters would actually vote one way or the other on? Does Joe Biden getting something else big done impact Democrats in 2022? What does matter looking at the midterms?
Well, there's two ways to look at 2022. One is Democrats are going to lose no matter what, because it's a midterm, President's Party. They always lose something. The margins are so narrow that just the tiniest bit of something means it's all over. So get what you can while you can and don't even worry about the politics. But that's one school of thought. It's not illegitimate. The other is, even though it doesn't usually happen, it can happen. I mean, it's happened 3 times in the past, I think post-Reconstruction, that the President's Party has gained a few seats, and I think a 4th time when they just lost like very, very little, enough that Democrats could actually survive this time around. And when those things happen, it's almost always because there's some kind of crisis, and the President's Party is seen as managing that crisis well. And so the usual dynamic of the President's Party's coalition splintering because of the natural realities of governing, trade-offs, compromises, imperfections, unfulfilled aspirations and dreams, things that deplete some of your base or make some people in the middle peel off while your opposition is unified against whatever it is the President's Party is doing. That's the reason why the President's Party usually loses. So if Democrats can't pass Build Back Better at all, or if it's reduced to such a nub that it makes some people unhappy, that makes some people in the base displeased, even if it's a good general election politics, it's good for the center. If that base is unhappy, if any faction is unhappy, that's bad for the midterms. You need full unity to overcome the historical trend. So that's another reason why it's not good for Democrats to be in this tug of war right now where someone's going to feel bad regardless of the outcome. You want everyone to feel good about the outcome, even though it's almost certainly going to be some kind of compromise.
What about something like the Afghanistan withdrawal, which, by the way, I was and remain completely in favor of and believe it would have been just as, if not more chaotic under Donald Trump, but that ultimately it's the right decision. When that took place in August into September, there was a lot of talk of this will torpedo the midterms for Democrats. And I really didn't see it for two reasons. One, that it really was a Biden thing. And of course, it can affect the midterms. We're talking about that. But number two, it just seems like there's enough time between then and the midterms, and the relatively short memories of voters struck me as I don't think Afghanistan is going to play a factor in the midterms. What do you think?
I mean, I wrote a piece to that effect at the Washington Monthly at the time, and with the caveat of some kind of 9/11 occurring, some kind of terrorist attack on our soil launched from Afghanistan because a terrorist outfit was able to regroup under the current circumstances. That would be, obviously bad for people's lives and bad for Democrats politically. Outside of that, I think we're already seeing Afghanistan fading into the background of politics. Having said that, Biden has not had a single day with a good headline since early August when the Afghanistan withdrawal occurred. It means, and if it's not Afghanistan, it's COVID, Delta variant. If it's not COVID, it's something on the border. If it's not something on the border, it's the infrastructure bill being blocked. If the infrastructure bill being blocked, it's that Build Back Better is in limbo, or there's a debt limit drama. It's always something.
Yeah.
And there hasn't been a good day. And Afghanistan was just the first time when there was an obviously bad day where people started saying, wait a second, maybe these guys don't know what they're doing. Maybe they're not perfect. Maybe they're not the most competent operation in the universe. You can fix that with some wins, putting some points on the board, which is why I wonder. I mean, I certainly can't predict this, and it's not the way it panned out, 2.5 weeks ago. But we are coming up on another deadline on October 31st, where Nancy Pelosi said we need to pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill by this date because the Highway Trust Fund is going to expire. Now, she said the same thing a month ago. And what happened a month ago was that progressives said, we don't care. We're not going to give you the votes. Biden came to the House and said, look, these have to be done at the same time. And then people scrambled and passed a Highway Trust Fund extension for 30 days. And progressives essentially said, this isn't a real deadline because you can push that off. They were proven correct. However, you can only push off that Highway Trust Fund deadline if Republicans in the Senate agree. That's not a reconciliation vote. That's a regular order vote. Republicans did that last month because they said this isn't costing any extra money. There's enough money in the kitty for federal government to pay out what's needed for road and transit projects for states and localities. But that may not be the case 2 weeks from now. So if it's a real hard deadline, I should also say one of the negative headline in the past 2 weeks has been the supply chain issue.
Yes.
Biden is saying he's trying to fix that. He knows it's a serious problem. And over the long haul, we need to pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill because it invests money in ports and freight rail. So he's connecting those two things right now. Do they really want to have the Highway Trust Fund, lapse? So no money's paid out to states and localities for infrastructure projects indefinitely, while there is a supply chain crisis going on.
Right.
Might Biden come back to the House in 2 weeks and say, look, we're in a jam here, people. We're not getting anywhere on Build Back Better. We got a supply chain problem. My polls are in the dumps. We're trying to be the infrastructure party. We can't be having infrastructure projects get throttled over it wouldn't happen in an instant. It wouldn't be like all of a sudden everyone drops their jackhammers. But states and localities would not know over time if the money was coming, and that would cause a lot of disruptions. And people would vocally complain. Do you want those kind of complaints happening at the state and local level? While we've had months and months of inactivity from Democrats, might Biden come in and put his thumb on the scale the other way and say, I need you on this vote now. I need you to suck it up and pass this vote.
Right.
Not predicting it. I'm saying those factors are in the mix. And one other factor in the mix, I should add, Virginia. November 2nd is the Virginia gubernatorial election. Terry McAuliffe, the Democratic nominee, is saying, I'm sick of these Democrats in Washington not getting stuff done. We need this infrastructure bill passed. And some people fear if McAuliffe loses, then everything's going to fall apart. That Manchin and Sinema will be even harder to get and harder to kowtow to progressives because they'll say that it's your intransigence that led to this calamity in Virginia. And progressives might say it's your intransigence because you wouldn't do things our way, and just be hard and hard to come to terms. So what all that come together and make Democrats suck it up on the infrastructure bill? Not predicting, but those are different factors that were not present a month ago.
So wait, are you predicting or not? I'm not sure. No,
I'm
kidding. No,
not going to go that far. Biden might still conclude he doesn't want to be a source of party disunity.
Right. No, I'm kidding.
Makes him hesitant to push one faction over the other.
Yep.
But I do think you have a different set of factors than you did a month ago.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Bill Scher, contributor to the Washington Monthly and Real Clear Politics, host of the history podcast When America Worked. Bill, always a pleasure.
Same here. Take care.
If you value what we do at The David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind the scenes videos, the daily bonus show, the commercial-free daily show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and t-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. All right, let's do a lesson here in dishonesty, propaganda, lying with statistics, a bunch of other stuff. I have a graphic that I'm going to show you that I believe is at least a top contender for the most dishonest graphic ever shown on Fox News. And it's dishonest probably in 3 to 4 different ways. Okay, here's the graphic. As you can see, it's from Sean Hannity's Fox News program last night. This is really instructive in terms of propaganda and lying with statistics. The graphic is part of a segment wanting to blame Joe Biden for COVID deaths. It was a segment about how bad Joe Biden is. And of course, the hypocrisy is incredible because these very same people didn't really care about the COVID death numbers when Donald Trump was president. And in fact, they went out of their way to apologize for Trump and claim he's doing a great job and COVID's not that serious and all of that stuff. So the claim here is just comparing COVID deaths in 2020 to COVID deaths in 2021 and making it seem that Joe Biden is worse than Trump. Now, what the graphic says or shows is that in 2020, 352,000 people died of COVID, whereas in 2021, 372,000 people died of COVID. So the point here is 2020 under Trump, 352,000 COVID deaths. 2021, not even in the full year under Biden, more deaths by about 20,000. So let's consider the ways that this is dishonest. And I'm not doing this to score points for one team or another. It's about understanding whether you are being honestly given information and what you should deduce from it. So first of all, Donald Trump was president the first 3 weeks of 2021. During those first 3 weeks of 2021, about 72,000 Americans died of COVID. So right off the bat, despite this graphic, of these deaths, 424,000 happened when Trump was president and 300,000 happened while Joe Biden was president. So like without even debating the merits of whether this entire exercise makes any sense, by president, Donald Trump actually was president during 124,000 more COVID deaths than Joe Biden. This is actually pretty dumb. I'm not going to even say this is an intelligent thing to do. There are lots of people, for example, that died in February when Biden was president, but who caught the virus when Trump was president. Who gets the blame for that death? It's sort of a weird metric. It's not very useful. But by the standards of the people making the graphics, it could say 424,000 dead under Trump, 300,000 dead under Biden. That paints a completely different picture. That's layer of dishonesty number one. Second layer of dishonesty. the deaths didn't really start in the United States until April of 2020. Okay. In the last 10 days of March 2020, we saw deaths go up. So even in comparing these numbers and thinking about them as Trump versus Biden, Trump kind of had a freebie for January of 2020, February of 2020, March, most of March of 2020. Now, some will say, David, there were deaths in those months. We just didn't know that they were COVID yet. They were called pneumonia or something else. That's fine. The point is they're not in the numbers. OK, so in the Biden category, they're including the first 3 weeks of 2021 when Biden wasn't even president, plus more months overall, since we have about 9 weeks left this year. And Trump really only had 8 months worth of deaths in 2020. So that's another level of dishonesty for what is a very stupid exercise. All right. That's another one. But now let me get to the really dishonest part of this. The deaths, even in 2021, even today, are mostly, overwhelmingly, the unvaccinated, who are mostly Trump supporting Republicans. So is it really Joe Biden's fault that Trump supporters have been bamboozled into not wanting the vaccine by other right wingers, and they are dying? For me, that's the real dishonesty here. And of course, there's this highly contagious Delta variant, which plagued the planet in 2021. That's not Trump's fault. It's not Joe Biden's fault, although more vaccination would have slowed down the mutation, as Vincent Racaniello and others have told us. So a ton of this stuff, it's kind of ticky-tacky, as we might say in sports. Well, there's these 3 weeks, and in January when Trump was still president, but when do the deaths really become under the watch of one president versus when the deaths happen, when the person got sick? It's tough. It's nebulous. It's not particularly meaningful. Comparing 11 months for Biden to 8 months for Trump, that's also dishonest. But the real dishonesty is that they do all this stuff while ignoring that the deaths are higher because of right-wing anti-vaxxers. And it's more right-wingers than left-wingers all along who were participating in behaviors that spread the virus. And also, this is a subtle attack on vaccination. We shouldn't ignore that. We are far more vaccinated now than in 2020. And that was the theme yesterday on Fox News, in part thanks to the death of Colin Powell, who, as we already talked about, was fully vaccinated, but 84 years old, immunocompromised, Parkinson's, cancer. So it's incredibly dishonest. It's important to spot the stuff. And sometimes there's kind of two analyses that need to be done. One is we just look at the numbers and we think through, okay, wait, so who was president in 2020? How many deaths? Okay, let's think about that. When did deaths start to even be counted in 2020? We have to think about all of that. But then there's the big dishonesty, which is the ways in which these numbers are being used to make political statements that don't actually follow from the numbers and ignore who it is that's keeping people from being vaccinated in the first place. So up there, one of the most dishonest graphics I've seen on Fox News when you really break it down and think it through. Okay, we have the next iteration of grift from the former president, Donald Trump. Donald Trump is now asking supporters to donate $45 each in order to, quote, solve the election fraud. Now, you might still be wondering, David, sir, what election fraud are you talking about? They're still talking about 2020. The non-existent election fraud from the election almost a year ago. We're like 2 weeks from a year out from the 2020 election. That's the one. OK, here's the letter that Donald Trump sent to his supporters. This is under the Save America PAC. Friend, did you see what President Trump said? And then it includes the quote from Trump, the statement from Trump from last week. If we don't solve the presidential election fraud of 2020, Republicans will not be voting in 2022 or 2024. It is the single most important thing for Republicans to do. Then they pivot to asking for cash. The truth is, we need at least $45 from each patriot reading this email, each patriot, if we are going to have the necessary resources to solve the election fraud of 2020. President Trump is calling on you to donate to the Protect Our Elections Fund. With your help, we'll defend our elections from the lying left and win big in 2022 and then again in 2024. And then a link. Please contribute at least $45 or more immediately to the Protect Our Elections Fund. Now, we've seen this grift before. They're advertising, hey, with at the low price of $45, you can help overthrow the will of the people, because obviously Joe Biden won in 2020. But it's not even that the goal is not an admirable goal, that it's a goal based in lies and deception. This is a grift. Remember when Trump was raising money with the same type of rhetoric between November and January 20th, or between November and December 14th, and then January 6th, and then January 20th? The money didn't go to recounts. The money didn't go to audits. The money didn't go to fighting election fraud. The money went to Trump, to helping Trump pay off debts. That's what it was. These people got scammed. It was what we saw between November and January, but then it didn't stop. It's continuing. We are a year out, folks. If you believe that the $45 you donate to Trump is actually going to be used to fight election fraud, then you deserve to be scammed and grifted out of your money. Trump, by the way, Trump must be in real trouble financially, as we believe him to be, a year out and still milking this. Like, even for his standards, this is a lot. And when we ask, will Trump supporters ever realize there was no fraud? Probably not. They're going to believe there was election fraud for a long time. Will Trump supporters ever realize the fraud is this grifty fundraising being undertaken by Donald Trump? Some of them did. There were a couple of big donors to the fixed Take Back the Election, whatever fund. There were a couple of big donors back. We talked about it earlier in this year, who sued to get their money back because they realized that the money wasn't actually used for that. So some seem to be coming to that realization. But the projection here seems deliberate, right? Trump is the guy who threatened secretaries of state and said, you got to find me the 11,780 votes. He messed with the Postal Service to try to make it less likely that absentee ballots would be delivered on time. He incited an insurrection. He extorted Ukraine for political dirt on his opponent. He filed dozens of frivolous lawsuits through Rudy Giuliani and these different lawyers. He said, stop the counting here, start the counting there. He weaponized COVID regarding the mail-in ballots. He's the guy who tried to steal the election. If there was fraud and dishonesty, it was Trump who did it. But they don't care. They are the ones now being told it was the Democrats that did it, and give me money and I will go and fix it for you. At a certain point, they deserve to be separated from their money. And listen, the government shouldn't step in by their own standards, because that would be the nanny state. If they decide I'm going to donate to this, it's caveat emptor, right? And that should be it. And many of these people are falling for it, unfortunately. And this really is sad. A lot of the people donating to these different funds and sending $45, they really can't afford it. They're not high income folks, not folks with a lot of disposable income. And that's probably the saddest part of all of this, quite frankly. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Call me anytime. Here's a teacher who called in during their lunch break. They have a student who seems to have been the victim of serious political disinformation. My guess would be from the parents. Take a listen to this.
Hi, David. I teach fifth grade in the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois, and I needed to call you. I'm on my lunch break because right before lunch, one of my students raised his hand. I called on him, probably thinking it was a question about the material or going to the bathroom, something like that.
Sure.
And in a straight face said, Joe Biden belongs in prison. And I just froze. It just froze in the classroom. So just an interesting experience I wanted to share and maybe get your reaction, maybe get your maybe explanation of why.
Well, listen, I don't know what age the student was, but my guess is this is not something the student learned in school. but this is probably something the student is hearing at home. And it's very, very sad. I mean, listen, you come from a conservative family, you might say, oh, Joe Biden's position on abortion doesn't align with my family's or whatever. But Joe Biden belongs in prison for what crime? And that is one of those signals. When you hear that, it's sort of like when you would hear certain things said about Barack Obama, where you go, that's not a policy disagreement. You've fallen for really serious weaponized disinformation. And it's a sad thing that it's even hitting kids. We've got a great bonus show for you today. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court backing qualified immunity for police officers. Really a big story. With far-reaching trickle-down implications. We will look at Democrats eyeing a carbon tax after Joe Manchin's opposition to the climate plan and the reconciliation bill. And we are going to talk about how Joe Biden is now trying to figure out how can he quietly restart student loan payments. And why quietly? Well, I think you can probably guess why. We'll talk about all of those stories on today's bonus show. Get instant access by signing up at joinpacman.com. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.